What's up, everybody? Let's talk some more Fever Hoops here on this channel. Perfect timing because the finals are done. And I saw Caitlin Clark last week at a Pacers preseason game, so I have lots of stuff on my mind and lots of stuff I want to get to because it's officially off-season time, first and foremost. Congrats to former Fever players Kennedy Burke and Benijah Laney-Hamilton on their WNBA championships with the Liberty. Laney was just ridiculous at times for them in past seasons. Obviously, Kennedy Burke had a wonderful year for them as well. Congrats to both of them. Let's talk some Fever. Let's talk some offseason because also some big news came through the pipeline today that the WNBPA, so the Players Association, which works with the league to represent the players, has made it clear they are opting out of the CBA. This was 100% expected for the WNBA and players to have to work through this. This could portend a lockout, potentially, if things don't go well in negotiations for a new CBA, but yet this was the expected step for the league and its players to get to because the old one was, quite frankly, not where it needed to be, especially with where the league is headed. All sorts of stuff needs to be addressed in the next CBA between the players and the league. A new economic model is a key point that they have stated is going to be key in negotiation. The current system with restrictive caps that are really hard, which we'll talk about some of that later. I want to get to Fever free agency and look at some of the more specific numbers now that we can. And they want to look at a more equity-based model that grows and evolves as the league's business grows as well. And that seems important because there's a huge TV deal coming very soon for the league. If you've read recently about the league potentially losing money again, I cannot verify all those numbers by myself, obviously, but even if that number that has been posted out there is correct, the league is about to be making a ton more revenue from their next TV deal that should make that number go from the red to the black, and they'll be making money. And of course, that needs to be followed up with where does that money go? Who to? The players would like to get more of it, and they deserve it. They are the product, and of course, that leads to player salaries being a key part of this next thing too. People have talked about what current player salaries are and their belief that they're too low, and that will be a key part of negotiations. But it'll be more than that, right? Retirement benefits for players who are in the league for a certain amount of time. Pregnancy and family planning benefits for players currently in the league who are, going through that sort of situation. Standards for facilities all over the league. Some teams have wonderful facilities that are in one place. Some teams are really spread out in their city. Some teams are not very good, not up to the standard that's needed. I've talked to all sorts of players in my time in the league, or around the league, excuse me. Some with the Fever, some not. That facilities was a big part of them picking where they were going to play. Whether that was for their family situation, whether that was for their own ability to grow, whether that was for their own other needs or purposes, whatever, time to get in the gym, travel time. There's a million reasons to pick certain places, but I have heard that being a deciding factor all the time. Some teams have better facilities than others. For those who don't know, all of the Fever's facilities are primarily right inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse, right? They have a weight room, they have their own practice court, their own full facility with a training room, locker room, film room. There's lots of tunnels to get there that don't require walking through a bunch of the rest of the arena. So without getting too much into it, it's very nice. Lots of players are happy with it. They obviously invest well into their players with some support staff that has changed in recent seasons. So the Fever do well in that regard. But those will be the key things to watch because this current CBA expires at the end of October next year, 2025. So not in the next 10 days, but still something to keep an eye on in the W space because the league is changing significantly. The new TV deal is going to bring in a ton of money, well-deserved money for a league that is exploding in popularity. Caitlin Clark, a big driver of that this year, of course, selling out arenas and driving TV viewership. But we just saw excellent viewership numbers for the finals, growing over last year, and to go with it, an excellent series that people tuned into consistently. So that's great for the league. That's great for them to sell their product to potential bidders, and that's good for CBA negotiations for teams. That will be good for players. That's just good for the ecosystem of the league and their ability to make money and pay back investors and grow, and that's all great. So that's all stuff that is not Fever specific, and yet is incredibly important to the Fever because a new CBA is a chance that if the structure changes enough, like it did in the NBA, for example, in 2016 when they had a salary cap spike with a new TV deal, even though it wasn't CBA related, although the NBA is currently going through a CBA change themselves, there's a chance the salary structure changes in a way that would vastly benefit players, and they would like to be free agents so that they could sign contracts in that new salary system. So Fever specifically, I would expect, this is not a certainty, teams will not want this, but players certainly will, so negotiations will be fascinating. I would expect lots of players in the WNBA who are free agents this offseason to want one-year deals. Will they get them? I don't know. It depends how good they are and how much leverage they have in any sort of negotiation. But that will be a big deal for the Fever, who have 3 free agents, certainly, in Kelsey Mitchell, in Erica Wheeler, and in Temi Fagbenle, who are all going to be hitting the market in various forms. Kelsey Mitchell and Erica Wheeler could be unrestricted free agents, could be core free agents, depending on what happens there. I don't think Erica Wheeler would get cored, but it is technically possible. Temi Fagbenle could be restricted, and the rest of their players could be free agents, could be waived at any time in theory. But in terms of actual contract expiring, those players would seem to want a one-year deal, but teams would like to get longer deals. They always want stability, control. Teams like to plan. There's a new front office in Indiana. Who knows what their priorities are? But that, I think, will be an interesting thing this summer. But teams could potentially take advantage of one-year deals where if there is a giant change in the salary cap structure, teams could all of a sudden have a bunch of money to spend in free agency a calendar year from now, right? In 2026 winter. So that could also be a reason for them to want shorter deals as well. So I don't know anything. I don't represent players. I don't work for a team. But in talking to people, in studying how this looks like it could go down, I predict this will be the winter of the one-year deal. So keep an eye on that potentially when it comes to Kelsey Mitchell, when it comes to Erica Wheeler, and when it comes to Temi Fagbenle, if the Fever even want them back. And that's what makes this such a fascinating summer for the Fever is there's so many layers to make it impossible to predict what could free agency look like for them, even though it's kind of clear what they should want and how it should go, right? The expansion draft is first. I have a video on this channel, if you're watching this on YouTube, about that already, and who I would protect if I was the Fever. Some disagreements from listeners. That's fine. My case would be that they should protect their starting five from last year, plus Temi Fagbenle. That would make the most sense to me from a potential trade value perspective. Even if some of those players may not necessarily be back on the team next year, even if they're protected, at least you can trade at that point. But that's just my opinion. I understand people saying, well, if you're going to trade some anyway, just let them go. That's fine. Either way, the way that this becomes interesting to me is the Fever will almost certainly lose someone in the expansion draft. I suppose it's possible they trade stuff so that the Valkyries don't pick someone from their team, but the likelihood is they will lose someone from that. But with 3 free agency slots, they have 3 draft picks, and they can bring more players than 12 into training camp, so it's possible they make all their picks, but they probably have, if you bring in a first-round pick, they have the 8th pick. Now that's officially known because the expansion draft locked in the Valkyries will be picking. If the Fever do pick someone in the first round and they want to keep Kelsey Mitchell, all of a sudden they're getting close to a full roster, and that doesn't even account for a second-round pick, any signed free agents, anyone retained. So them losing someone in the expansion draft, it could potentially open a roster spot. They could opt to waive anyone really, but they could waive without penalty anyone with an unprotected salary for the coming season. Victoria Saxton, Christy Wallace, Grace Berger. Could at least you discuss those players. I suppose if you made me guess right now, the Valkyries will be picking Grace Berger of the unprotected expansion draft list for the Fever. So that's where things stand from an offseason perspective for them. Now, if you go look at their cap reality, like if you just pencil in some numbers, these are all made up. A supermax for Kelsey Mitchell if the core comes her way, plus I made these up, but let's just combine them and say $220,000 on one-year deals combined for Erica Wheeler and Temi Fagbenle, and then a standard amount for a first-round pick, right? That would put the Fever at 13 players, and that would still put them about $110,000 below next year's salary cap to add someone else. But if you subtract Erica Wheeler's money, and I made up estimated salaries for Erica Wheeler and Temi Fagbenle. We don't know what they would make. I did just use the Supermax number for Kelsey Mitchell, and draft pick numbers are set into the CBA. So if you just use those numbers, if you take away one of Wheeler or Temi Fagbenle, all of a sudden you can afford a really good player as the Fever and fit them into your system. Or if you take away whoever's gone in the draft, because I have no one removed for the expansion draft in that number because I can't predict who will be picked. But if you subtract someone out, that number gets even higher, right? It's very easy to imagine the Fever having a ton of wiggle room to make something happen this summer because they lose 2 huge salaries entering free agency in Kelsey Mitchell and Erica Wheeler. And of course, they could be brought back at different numbers, maybe more for Mitchell, less for Wheeler. But that's a chance for the Fever to add somebody. And the free agency class will be fascinating because similarly for them, right, maybe they get cored. Maybe teams are more willing to core and keep their own players just for a year to see what the next CBA is going to look like. So obviously, brilliant, incredible players would be great for the Fever to get. Satu Sabali's been thrown around as like the dream fit by everybody for forever. If Satu Sabali wants to come to the Fever and the Wings don't want to keep her, they're apparently hiring a new GM. They just fired their coach. Maybe that becomes something, but maybe someone in the Natasha Howard realm of talent is more reasonable. Maybe the Sun have some massive changes and some of their star players come available. Who really knows? It's too early to see who is and isn't staying with their teams, who gets cored, who doesn't, what teams' directions end up being. And if I'm looking off to the side and you're watching on YouTube, I apologize. I'm looking at a list of free agents. But either way, anyone who wiggles free and may become available, the Fever should be able to have, and they will likely have the flexibility to be able to offer them a competitive, if not, impossible to refuse offer. And that makes their summer extremely fascinating. We'll be able to do another one of these videos once the expansion draft is done and it's clear who the Fever have lost and who they'll have and who they'll potentially be negotiating with. And it's easier when their draft pick is known. There's no lottery element to this for the first time for them in a while. But the new CBA, the finals are done. All this stuff is making it a little more clear. The expansion draft rules have been set, what the Fever's offseason could look like. We heard from Kelly Krauskopf about what her vision is for the Fever and building them back. She's done this before. I might do another video on what she said and what I know of her and her past with the Fever, because I have covered this team for a while. I've talked to Kelly for years about the Fever. I talked to her after the Christy Sides hire and even before that. So if you guys are interested in that, I'm happy to do that as well. But that is where life and reality is for the Fever right now. Their new GM starts, Amber Cox, very soon, and its offseason is officially off and rolling. If you want to hear more, I'm happy to make more videos. Please leave some questions in the comments if that's the case, and I'll have writing coming at the next Toops. Long story on Christy Sides and likely Aaliyah Boston coming from me very soon. So thank you guys for listening. I hope you learned something. If you have questions, let me know. If not, take care. See you very soon.